Welcome to this episode of One on One with Mitch Lafon, and joining me this week, legendary Yes guitarist Steve Howe. We talk about their upcoming 2016 summer tour featuring the entire Drama album and Tales from Topographic Oceans Side 1 and 4. We also look back at his history, including his time with Asia. But before that, if you want to check me out, head over to Twitter at Mitch Lafon and on Facebook One on One Mitch Lafon. And with all that out of the way, let's get right into this. Here is the one, the only, legendary guitarist, Steve Howe. We are speaking with Yes's Steve Howe. The upcoming summer tour is the album series performing Drama and Tales from Topographic Oceans. Pleasure to speak with you.
All right, Mitch. Very nice to talk to you, too.
So let me start with this, the name of the tour, the album series. Is this suggestive that the other 20 or so albums that you've done will eventually, or some of them will eventually become part of this series of performing them intricately?
Well, yeah, we've got to kind of talk back on that because basically about 3 years ago we started that album series, and it would have been nice if we called it the album series, but we're calling it now retrospectively and futuristically, if you like, the album series, because the first one we did was going for the Yes album, Close to the Edge. Then we did Close to the Edge and Fragile, and then we did Drama and Fragile, and now we're doing Drama and Tales. So we're actually kind of, almost, rolling over on these different ideas, but it's been very exciting.
Yeah, and how is it for you to do a full album like that in these shows? I mean, going back, there's always studio magic that happens. How is it actually bringing that to the live stage?
Well, I can't say, but for me, it's very nice when I start, say, Roundabout, and I know that I don't really stop until the end of Heart of Sunrise. It's a lot more inventive than just playing Roundabout or Heart of the Sunrise, because we're actually playing the whole album. It's a kind of opportunity. It's a kind of demonstration, if you like, of what we do. Instead of saying, look, here's the song you know best from the album, we play the whole album. And it gives you a chance to kind of, experience things that sometimes never been on stage, like 5% for Nothing was never played on stage, Run to the Light's never been played on stage. So we bring those songs into play as well, like Adventure. We did a proper arrangement of Adventure. We do proper arrangements, from the original thing. And that's our style. That's what we like doing.
Yeah, so talk to me about the Drama album in terms of its importance for Yes. This is the one where John and Rick left.
Yeah.
How close was it to actually not happening? Did you sit down and say, maybe we should just move on? Or were you always going to be, we're going to make this album, it doesn't matter who's here, let's go?
The thing was that the three of us, Chris, Alan, and myself, were very committed to this album. And then, we did a little work with John, but it didn't work out. So we just felt that we ought to carry on. I mean, there was like we did even when Chris passed away. Not only did Chris approve Trevor, Billy Sherwood, but we basically, yes, go forwards if we can. And we haven't hit an obstacle big enough yet to stop us in our tracks. But of course, it's an evolving story. It's been going on for but a long, long time, since 1968. And I was the first new guy to join the band. So I was the first guy to start that revolving door of Yes. So, it's Drama constitutes to us a very formidable way of ending that period in our lives. And it was the strangest coincidence that, The Age of Plastic came out, Video Killed the Radio Stars, a hit. And then we suddenly heard the album and thought, God, these guys are just so clever. And they've got songs and, maybe they want to co-write. So when we asked them, they were thrilled to bits, of course, and wanted to do it. So it was an opportunity not to miss, and one that, we've always, I was talking to Trevor earlier today, and, he was on stage in London singing Tempest Future. He's going to do the same thing somewhere in the States as well. So we're kind of, we live in Drama days. I mean, when this band got going with, even before Geoff joined, from 2008, we were playing Machine Messiah and Tempest Future. So, in fact, it's funny how things come around, but that's how they come around.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about the album a bit more. You did mention Chris real quick. he passed away obviously last year, and you got to play a show in August without him for the first time in 40 some years.
Yeah.
How was that experience for you? I mean, is it difficult to sort of get on stage, or is it actually exciting in the sense that you're going to pay tribute and say, you know what, we're going to have the spirit live on? How was that first show for you in August last year?
Well, I mean, we were prepared, we'd rehearsed, but like you said, the second version was that we knew that Chris had, contributed a great deal to the band, and we'd never done a show without him. So we didn't sort of over-engain about that. We just kind of got on. But the feedback when we got the meet and greet after with about 50 people was that, we were doing something that they were really pleased we were doing. And then after a few nights, I did start to look over at Billy and get a kind of nice friendly tingle that Billy was the only person that could stand in for Chris that we knew, could sing like Chris, could play all his parts, and want to get the sounds the same as well as all the records, like I do with my guitar parts. I program them, he programs his bass, so that the bass represents the kind of sound that, he doesn't play a Rickenbacker, which is almost better really, because he doesn't imitate Chris in that way at all, but he has the sound, he creates that sound through his technology. So once we did a few shows and I looked over and I grinned at him a bit, I realized that, the boat had gone out. We were now in deep water and we were loving it, and the fact that all those shows up until this tour have had the Chris Squire tribute at the beginning of it, we felt that also endorsed to the audience the reasoning behind this. This is not merely a commercial ploy to keep a band going. This is a music that has an existence, a life of its own, and we go out and play it.
Yeah, and music has an impact that's immeasurable in people's lives and in society and so forth. So music should, of course, live on. Back to the Drama album for a second. You have Geoff Downes and you have Trevor that come in from, and I've always said the Buggles, but the Buggles, I guess is what it is. As a young kid then, listening to that song, Video Killed a Radio Star, I was enthralled by it, but what they were doing and the sound seemed somewhat different to what Yes was doing. And how do you look at those guys and say, these would be perfect for our band?
Well, mainly because of songs like, The Age of Plastic,
right.
Vermilion Sands, all the prognosis that was going on in their music but basically the sound, the material obviously was what they wrote, but we weren't intending just to play their material. But people of that, who could make a record like that and have those production skills and everything going on, was obviously a big yes to us, and that's why we gave it a try. If it hadn't worked, we wouldn't have done it, and it wouldn't be now being talked about. But as it happened, it did work. And when you think about Trevor's performance on Machine Messiah, particularly, and the things that they brought to the party were what any Yes member is expected to bring to the party: some songs, some fluid ideas, intersection, plenty of arrangement skills, and a happy face,
Trevor was the vocalist on the album, his only album as a vocalist. I guess the easy question is, why wasn't he the vocalist on future albums? Why did his voice not carry the Yes sound down the road?
Well, it certainly did on the record.
Sure.
But the opposition we saw in Europe, Britain mainly, Lewisham, Croydon, and a few other gigs, people were quite rude to Trevor. And we were quite upset about it, but, we ploughed on. So at that point, Trevor had, it's far too complicated to tell the whole story. But basically, in short terms, there were other projects that people were going to think about doing. And unless we were going to get behind the idea of carrying on straight away with Trevor singing another album, then we were all going to go off and do different things, hence Asia, hence Chris and Alan's attempt with Jimmy Page, and Trevor's production of the second album, that he did a lot of Adventures in Modern Recording. So he got on with that, and before you know it, Trevor's having so much success as a producer. He doesn't have to be a singer, doesn't have to write all the songs. He can produce, the likes of what he produced. So then he produced Yes. So that gave him a kind of a whole other spin. So I don't think Trevor's got that many regrets, other than we have things up our sleeve which are going to surprise some people, but we can't tell you what that is. But we've been in, it's been nice to keep the friendship going.
Yeah, and hopefully he'll come and sing at one or two shows. So you mentioned Asia. 1980 was Drama, 81 Asia Forms. What was the decision making there in terms of, let me take this brand, yes, and put it aside, and then build up this new thing with Geoff? Talk to me a bit about that.
Well, really, I described to you how Yes kind of ended out, and then I was looking for something to do. I was an open mind. I didn't mind what it was. So, I heard that John Wetton was doing the same thing. He was having a think about UK and the things he'd been doing. And so when we got together, we hit it off, which we still do. In the interim years, of course, we didn't speak for many years, but we're now great friends again. And so when we met, we were great friends then. We made friends. We wrote Without You, Cutting It Fine, we were writing songs, One Step Closer. And then, of course, I introduced them to Geoff. And, even though the band wanted to be a three-piece guitar trio, I said, no, you don't understand. You've got to hear Geoff, right? You've got to hear him. So he comes in the room and in Shepherd's Bush and plays, and it's like, oh yeah, Geoff's in the band. So that's how Asia formed, was that we'd kind of just, we were all around kicking our heels and wondering what to do. And it was really exciting to think that it was a different approach coming out of a really big band like Yes and saying, oh, I've got a new band. Before, it had been, early bands in the 60s, which I had several of, about 3 or 4 bands, and they all kind of went from one mistake to another, but after Yes, it was much easier to use Yes as a platform, but there again, do something totally different. We didn't want Asia to be like Yes. We wanted it to be totally different, and it was. And
it was quite successful.
Pardon?
And it was quite successful.
Yeah. And we kept Roger. We were managed by the same guy. But there again, those were the patterns. And, of course, Roger came up with a different look for Asia. And so there was a lot of creativity. It didn't, it had its moment, let's say.
In 2000, I guess, 13, roughly, you retired from Asia. I mean, again, the simple question is, why retire from Asia? You're still doing shows with Geoff as part of Yes. Why not keep both projects going?
Well, I had done that for several years, because Asia reformed 2007. Or 6, really. Right. Yeah, that's right. And then, Yes, when Yes got back together 2008, I thought, oh, I'm a juggler. I can juggle these two balls, And so I did for a couple of years. And by the time it got to the end of that 2012, I was a stretch musician. Yes wanted me more, Asia wanted me more. So I decided that because of that, and the fact that the product of those two bands was that I had no time to do solo projects, no time to do my trio. So I decided that, I'd given I've given Asia 5 or 6 years. So I said, that's it, I can't do any more. And that's how we resolved it,
I'm going to take you to left field here. 1991, you do Innuendo with Queen. Well, you don't do it with Queen. You guessed on it. Let me be more precise.
Sure.
And of course, it hadn't come out publicly, but Freddie had been diagnosed with AIDS, and talk to me about those sessions. What was it like coming in and actually playing on a Queen album? Because I think that's every guitarist's dream, or every musician's dream. It's like, I'm on a Queen album, I'm on a Led Zeppelin album. And then
it was nice and fluky, because it almost might not have happened. But I was in a restaurant, and a tech guy went by and said, hey, yeah, it's Steve. And so they come down the studio. By the time I get there, they play the whole album to me, and then they finish with Innuendo. And the album finishes, and Roger and Freddie and Brian say, have a listen to this one. And so we play it. I says, yeah, well, we want you to play on that one. I said, well, you've got loads of guitars. What do you need? So they said, well, just go a bit kind of improv on this, So basically we, spent a couple of hours doing that, went off and had dinner, came back, had a listen, tidied it up a bit, and then that was it. So it was the most wonderful experience. Some of the best things are not planned, they just happen, like improvisation. And basically that's what that was. So I had a whale of a time. I was, in Switzerland with my friend Paul Sutin, and we had a couple of days off, so I went to Montreux, which is somewhere I like very much. So that's at the time when that was all going on. But we've only got 4 minutes before somebody's going to Skype me. Let me see if this guy already Skyped me.
Yeah, so we were talking about Innuendo. Is there anything more to add about that experience?
Well, I mean, there could be, but, all I can say is that Yes and Queen ran into each other quite a bit, not least of all when we were doing drama and when I was doing GTR with Steve Hackett in the middle. They were always around Townhouse Studios. I mean, they had their own bloody studio, but they were always using other studios. So they weren't always in Montreux recording. They liked a lot of other venues. Of course, it's a fantastic band, with great credibility. And in a way, strangely, big in America, but people would have thought they were just ginormous in America. I think that took a little while to build, and there were certain songs that, of course, opened it up. So, I love what Brian plays on the guitar. The guy wrote back and said, okay, that's fine. So I love what Brian plays on the guitar. It's so individual, and they're the guitarists I like. I mean, my main guitarist is Chet Atkins still. He's the guy who just opened up my mind to what you could do, not least of all because on the second album he had himself sitting in his own little home studio. And I thought, now that's how you make guitar records. You don't have to go out. You can do it at home. So Chet's my biggest inspiration, but all the guys, Jimmy Page, Brian May, I love them all. They're all part of what makes me a rock guitarist fundamentally. But, like Chet told me, just go out there. Well, not literally, but it gave me the idea that, to play any style I wanted.
Yeah, and I wonder who had the bigger thrill. Is it the bigger thrill that you are on a Queen album, or the Queen guys go, hey, we got a guy from Yes on our album, right? I mean, it sort of goes both ways. 2014, Heaven and Earth is the last release you've put out. Talk to me about that in two ways. First of all, when you get into the studio, 40, 45 years, whatever, after the band starts, do you say we need to make a Yes album, or do you say we just do whatever we want? And second of all, where do we go from here? Is there going to be one in 2017? Is it a finite process where, okay, we've made enough albums, or are you working on the next one?
Well, let's back it along to your first question.
Yes.
First of all. After Fly From Here, which there was a gap of 10 years between Magnification and Fly From Here, so that's amazing. Of course, there was a disarray time when for 3 years we didn't do anything at all. And that's when I reformed Asia and, people fiddled around for a while. And but so really, by the time we made Fly From Here, that was an experience in itself, a very good one. And of course, we had the stamp of Trevor on the record too. Well, when we went about Heaven and Earth, we kind of went, it was an accepted idea that, well, Yes would now make another record, right? And I held it back for as long as I could, trying to get the songs right and trying to get the collaborations. In the end, John Davison did a great thing and went around everywhere, visited everybody and did something with us all, which was a great concept. That's all I can really say about that record. It doesn't please me, I can't listen to it, but there are records you make like that where, you hear them an awful lot as you're making them, and you kind of know every intricacy of every reason why something is like it is and who said what to what and why did he sing like that. But basically, you know all that stuff, and then sometimes I get over it real quick. This album's going to take a while. So that does slightly influence the decision about the next record, which is that we have, tremendous interest from labels and people for this kind of an idea. And we're certainly not saying we'll never do it. But, there are a few criteria that Yes should hit. There's no obligation that we do make another record, but there's no reason why we shouldn't. But the thing is that if we're going to, we've got to decide what kind of record it is, because obviously something like Close to the Edge is really worth making, Close to the Edge too. But it wouldn't be if it was a pastiche of Close to the Edge, but if it was something that as inventive as that. And it takes a very inventive band, takes a lot of skilled engineering and production. And we most probably have some of those, strengths available. But the thing is, it's about getting there. And it's about making the decision when we do this. But first and foremost, it's about having some exceptional songs. And that's the make or break it of any record. You've got to have a lot of other good things to go with the good songs. But songs, and I hear songs a lot. I hear songs on the radio. I think that this song means nothing. You know what I mean? I mean, the lyrics are just like, and other songs you hear, have the sort of hopeful depth that you want. And they're not all cleverly written, but they are maybe enough to move you, So I guess we've got to hit some pretty big bars to get another record. But certainly we love the interest, but we're certainly not going to rush anything. So therefore, if you wait, you'll find out the answer.
Right. And it gets hard when you're a band, like an Aerosmith or a Yes or a Metallica or what, where you always have to top yourself. And at some point, it just must become impossible to be better than what you were before, right? I mean,
well, one doesn't know. I mean, I think as a guitarist individually, I've shown a lot of strength and developed my career as I've gone along. But what it would take is that internal creativity again to fire. I don't think you're ever too old to do this, but how you get picky enough and how you get clever enough to realize, honest enough, most probably, to really collaborate. That's a skill. Yeah, that might be something that you're more prepared to do when you're 20 or 30 and less prepared to do when you're 60 or 70. Yeah. So I can't deny those things play in, but I don't think they're actually an obstacle. They could be an ingredient that you've got to work around, but I don't see them as an obstacle.
But before we wrap up, let me just talk about Tales from Topographic Oceans. 4 sides, each song, 20 minutes roughly. Talk to me about putting that out and what the record company must have said, because, that was the era of we want 3 minutes and a big chorus and let's keep moving. And yes, obviously, Yes was different in terms of being progressive and stuff, but the record company must have still said something like, what are you doing here? Right. So talk to me about that experiment.
Well, that's quite easy because sure, when we did Fragile and, we had Roundabout, they were overjoyed. We had a hit record and everyone was talking. We brought that Close to the Edge. And I think then Armit really realized at Atlantic that we weren't necessarily a singles band. If you got Close to the Edge, it's not a single, So they tried a few DJ singles and things like that. And of course, nothing really happened. But what Atlantic loved was that, hey, it's a million seller, straight away, bang, out the door. It was selling like hotcakes. And revered, though. I mean, we had an effect on music like a lot of the great prog bands did. We had a reverberation effect on the music and people went, wow, look at that. So when we did Tales, I think they'd sort of like got into the pattern that we were not going to be predictable. There weren't going to be any hit singles necessarily. But who worries if you sell lots of albums? And it was the album era, the peak of that album band's era. So we reveled in that. And Armit, bless him, gave us the most freedom we could ever have, And that was one of the best things about Atlantic. But they were good with most of the bands. And at that time, if you were a pop band, you had to have a single. But, if you're an album band, hey, you're selling out Madison Square Gardens. Hey, what could they actually moan at us about? Like, oh, you're not doing enough. No, So I guess it was a two-way street. We had something and they had something. They had the big distribution and everything. And all the acts that they had to qualify were, were part of Ray Charles and Led Zeppelin, just to name two. It was obviously the right place to be, and we loved it.
Yeah, and it's going to be quite something to see that live. I know you have another interview, so I'll ask you one last question. Yeah. You did obviously retire from Asia at some point. Do you retire from being a working musician? Do you say, all right, it's time to stay home and we're done? Or do you just keep going sort of like B.B. King and Chuck Berry and all those guys until you can't?
Well, a mixture of both because, I've still got the joy and the love of guitar and music and songs, everything's still going, pumping away in me. So that isn't the reason to stop for sure. But I do think it's good for actors and models and musicians and even maybe composers to know when, maybe not composing, but to know when to stop, and some musicians that I'm very proud of to know decided that, hey, I was playing great, but it's time to quit because I'm not going to do anything else. So if I ever felt that I had kind of done the whole circuit, that round my guitar, but that may not actually happen. But I hope I have an awakening when anything that fails in me is going to affect that show, because I don't think musicians should go out incapacitated or not playing their best. I mean, sure, go out in a wheelchair if you like. I've got no problem with that. But play, providing you're playing well. But there again, let's hope that we're all sensible with our careers.
Right, and of course, Axl Rose with AC/DC just played a whole tour in a wheelchair, so why not, right?
Yeah, it could be done. It has to be thought about and seen conceptually. But this is the state of rock and roll in a way. Some of our old timer musicians, which I could almost be part of, but maybe even the era before me, they still go out and want to play. So music is a drug, if you like. It's a sort of an addictive quality. But I think it's good to know when you're not doing it so well and then stop.
And I think you're still doing it at a very high level, so there's no need to stop. Certainly not this year, and probably not in the next 10 years. So keep going. I do know that you have another interview at some point. We should do a part 2 and talk about GTR and all that other wonderful stuff. But thank you. Absolute pleasure.
Okay, then. Talk to you soon, Mitch. Bye.
Thank you. Now, bye-bye.
Cheers, Mitch.
Bye-bye. And there you have it, folks. My interview with legendary guitarist Steve Howe from the band Yes. What can I say other than that was very, very, very cool. He was such a great guest. Head over to Twitter at Mitch Lafon and Facebook one-on-one Mitch Lafon. Thank you for listening to this episode and all the episodes. There we go. Bye for now. Oh, my.